Hello, hello, and welcome to the Common Geeking Program. We are a book club style podcast where on each episode we discuss a different topic from our own geeky and nerdy perspectives. I am your host, as always, Jeff Leavitt, and this week we're going to be taking a look at Dungeons and Dragons, specifically the Eberron setting, and focusing on what's unique about that compared to the usual D&D style stuff. This time around I'm going to be joined by two fellow nerds who can introduce them themselves.
Oh, it is I, Ryan Mossbarger. It's been a hot minute, everybody. It's good to be back.
Hello, I'm Taeemul Chowdhury, or Chowder, whichever you prefer. That's it.
I know I've said it many times, but I'm going to say it again. I prefer Chowder. It's good to be back, Chowder. It's good to be back.
It's not that Taeemul isn't a great name, but Chowder is such a good nickname.
It is. It honestly is an amazing nickname.
And a great television show. Anyway,
love that show.
We're going to start off by summarizing and discussing the topic, and then we'll end with a little handy-dandy ratings section where we decide if the topic today was worthwhile and enjoyable and shit. You guys want to go into it?
Excuse me. Let me organize my million pieces of paper into a coherent note.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, so Ryan is the one who brought us this topic today, so he's going to kind of...
That's about Dalcor. We don't need to get into Dalcor.
You motherfucker.
Oh boy, Warforged? I guess we can start with... No, that's not adequate.
So he's
Should we talk about the Emerald Claw?
God,
Jesus, there's so much shit. Oh, man. Oh, beans, guys. There's too much.
Jesus. So Ryan's going to kind of summarize the differences between regular D&D and specifically Eberron, and kind of, So I guess we should start off by saying we did to research this topic. We played a little one shot in Eberron, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
we don't need to necessarily summarize that unless it becomes relevant, but
yeah, it was just like the little starter adventure, and the newest book that came out, Eberron Rising from the Last War. It has like a little short adventure at the end that we played through that's supposed to give you like a lot of the tone of the setting.
All right, cool, yeah. You want to give us the basics?
Oh, hell yeah. I fucking really want to. Hey everyone, I'll be breaking down Eberron for y'all. And instead of blacking out and expelling incoherent details of pretty much anything I can remember at you, like I did at Jeff and Chowder, I wrote some of this out, and I will read it thusly. So to get started.
Oh my goodness.
I'm going to talk about how the setting got started. So 3.5 came out, 3.0 came out around like 2000. And by like 2002, Wizards of the Coast was looking for some like fresh new something.
Wizards of the Coast, the people who make Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. So they were looking Wizards of the Coast. So they were looking for
not everyone knows this shit, Ryan, all right?
All right.
I know we know what 3.5 refers to, but
Sorry, yeah, Dungeons and Dragons. So they were looking for like a new direction. They wanted something, they wanted a new setting. They kind of felt like TSR's catalog, while like expansive had been done before. So instead of kind of like scrounging their own brains and like coming up with something, they decided to get the community involved. So they came up with a competition called the Fantasy Setting Search to create a setting for third edition. Something like 11,000 plus applicants submitted one-page like breakdowns of their world. From that list, over the course of a couple of months, they narrowed it down to 3 finalists who had to create a 100-page world Bible. And from that, Keith Baker and his setting, Eberron, were chosen as the victor.
God, could you imagine being the other two who had to write 100 fucking pages to not get it?
Well, and also they do not have rights to that either. So they came up with a great idea, and Wizards owns that.
Are you fucking... That's kind of bullshit. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah.
Wait, who doesn't have... Wait, they don't have rights to Eberron?
The two other finalists who didn't get chosen don't have rights to their 100-page world Bibles that they made and are not being used.
That's bullshit. Yeah, that is super bullshit. This is why you should never enter competitions like this.
So I do know there's one guy, he wrote one. He's the guy behind Giant in the Playground. That's like his nickname. And I want to say he was never able to unleash his, but I do think some of the other contestants were. I think they were able to work out a deal with like third-party publishers and Wizards of the Coast to get their stuff like out there. But I haven't heard a lot about that stuff, so it could be good, could be bad.
There was only 3 who had to do that, right?
Well, it was like multiple stages, so there was like, I think
Okay.
the midpoint was you would write a 10-page supplement that would expand out the world. I think there's only like 100 of those or something, but
Gotcha.
So Keith Baker and his setting Eberron were chosen. He worked at Wizards of the Coast for like the next year or two, creating all the setting stuff, fleshing out the ideas, writing all the books. And in 2004, I think it was in June, the official release of the Eberron campaign setting was released. And it was maybe a little bit divisive. Like, some people really liked it, some people didn't like it. It is non-traditional fantasy. And we're going to talk about some of these major differences. So Keith himself, he's been a very vocal supporter of his own work, and he has gone to great length. Yeah. Well, he's just, even though like there has been a drought of support for it through like 5th edition until basically right now, he has kept up a lot of like a dialogue with the community. And he's helped people work through their artistic problems. Like, people can, like ask a DM him, and I actually did that very recently for something that I'm writing, and he got back to me on Twitter.
Wait, you asked what of him?
Oh, I asked a question. So I was asking a question that is like a little bit of a weird question that goes into the lore, and he kind of like, yeah, sure, whatever floats your boat, which maybe not the most helpful answer, but it was an answer nonetheless. Keith's major conceit is that he wanted to take all of the existing pieces and parts of established D&D and work them into something without inherently changing the rules or stats. He didn't want to remix exactly, but he wanted to take he wanted to make a brand new setting from the ground up, but looking at things a slightly different way. I'll get into that a little bit more as we go through some of the main points, but really his major thing is he wanted to change the internal logic of the world and how it existed. To do this, he had to create his own logic, and the first thing he did is he wanted a closed cosmology. So much like 2nd edition's Dark Sun, 2nd edition D&D, which is like a supplement that's completely different from all the other ones. It's more about psionics. It's really dark, and it's got like gods are very sparse, stuff like that. He didn't want it to be fully connected to the greater cosmology of D&D. Like Dragonlance, Greyhawk, all that stuff, Mystera, all the various and sundry settings, Forgotten Realms, they do have connections with the greater world. So like sometimes you'll see Dragonlance characters in Greyhawk, sometimes you see Greyhawk stuff in Forgotten Realms. So, and there's also these really powerful, like, not quite gods, but pretty close. So, like, beings like Elminster, Vecna, or any other of those kind of, like, weird, kind of, like, weave through stories from various canons. He didn't want any of that. Because it kind of, if there's powerful beings like that, really, honestly, if there's powerful heroes like that, why are your heroes doing anything? And if there's powerful villains like that, how do they have any possible chance against them?
Right.
So he wanted to be completely separate. And because of that, because it's kind of closed off, the way he kind of closed it off in the greater cosmology, gods don't function the same way they do in, say, Forgotten Realms. Forgotten Realms, if you say, Helm, strike me down if I'm lying, like, canonically, there is a chance that Helm could just fucking strike you down if you're lying. Gods are active fucking forces in Forgotten Realms. Like, it's undeniable.
Right.
So he wanted them to be separate and farther apart. Like, the gods do not have direct influence on any of the things that are going on.
Right. Like, if we have gods in our world, it's more like that, right?
Yeah. It's more based on faith. You have to believe in the god for it to, like, kind of work in a way, especially for, like, clerics and stuff.
Yeah. Like, there's more deniability, so then religious classes actually have to have faith that doesn't
exactly. It has to be
hinge upon feasible proof. Yeah.
Yeah. And because of that, and it leads into my next point, alignment is flexible and genetic evil does not exist. So what I mean by alignment is flexible, Eberron is all about the world of gray. Like, good characters do bad things, bad characters do good things. It just really depends on the inherent reasoning of what they are doing, not the act in and of itself.
Yeah, right. And I like that because, like, I feel like the alignment system in regular D&D is just too limiting, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of limiting, and it kind of just doesn't work. It works a little bit better in 5e than it does in previous systems where they had, like, a really rigid alignment structure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so, it's like, even though you can just, do stuff that isn't necessarily aligned with your character's alignment, you're kind of fighting against it in a sense.
Yeah.
Like there'll always be some person who's like, that's not your alignment. I know.
Exactly,
but he's a character
yeah.
who needs to do stuff.
There's hard choices. There's hard choices. It's never so clean cut. It's like, oh, save the girl or burn a village. Sometimes to save the girl, you have to burn a village. Like, it's that kind of complex alignment and morality that I think works in Eberron's favor. And that's why, honestly, I think they've actually simplified it down for 5e. Because in previous editions, if you wanted to be a monk, you had to be lawful. If you wanted to be a certain kind of cleric, you had to be good. Like, you couldn't be a bad life cleric.
Yeah, and the thing is, I wouldn't even have a problem with that, but like, you end up with problems where people think in order to be a paladin, you need to be freaking Optimus Prime.
Yeah,
that's what it means to be
lawful
lawful
good. You have to be the stick in the mud.
So when like, you can be lawful good and be kind of a hard ass. Or
Exactly, yeah. There's such a spectrum, and honestly, it could be, there's so many different things you could be in the realm of good or evil. So you could be, so I think the best example is that evil doesn't necessarily mean you're uppercase evil. It doesn't mean like, say the guy down the street from your neighbor is evil. It doesn't mean he's plotting your death or he's going to slaughter your children. It might mean that he steals your paper in the morning and like he pisses on your rose bushes. But like, he's not going to murder you if given the choice. He's just a bad guy.
Right.
And I think
it's just kind of an asshole.
Area,
or maybe like the dude genuinely believes he's doing good, even though it's a pretty shitty thing
your bushes. So that gray area actually solves a major issue that earlier editions of D&D has. Third edition has a first level spell called Detect Evil. It's super. It's like not the lowest level, but basically the lowest level. You have one class in anything, and you have it, and that leads to a question: if the lowest level of magic, basically, you can detect evil, why would there ever be an evil mayor? Why would there be an evil king? Why would there be a bad priest at the head of a large, like a city-state or something like that?
Right, because like normal D&D acts like you're the only person in the world with, like, if you're in a world that's full of superpowers, why wouldn't the world be built around that?
Yeah, exactly.
Than acting as if it didn't exist,
So, how Eberron kind of brings that back.
That shit pisses me off about Harry Potter too. Like, why can they ever use magic to break into the bank? Like, don't they have protocols against that?
It's warded against it. But it's not good war. It's just in case somebody really wants to break in.
Right. In case 3 children want to go do it, they can still find their way around because they know how to do magic and they're spunky. Like,
yeah, exactly. So I think that's a really good thing about Eberron as a setting. It kind of allows, like, you can have an evil bank teller that might be stealing money, but he's still like a functioning member of society. If you scan somebody for evilness,
or like even someone who just like doesn't break any laws or goes about their daily life, but they're like kind of low-key racist, like they're probably evil even if they're not,
And it helps narratively with the DMs. Like, you can play with evil characters, but like, say you're in a room and there's one poisoner, but in a historically like high fantasy setting, only one of those people is probably going to be evil.
Right.
So you can immediately know who the poisoner is because it's the only evil person in the room. So kind of going off of that, I mentioned genetic evil. And it's something that is becoming more and more like people kind of talking about it and kind of poking and prodding Wizards of the Coast about it. But people don't like genetic evil.
Like how certain races are just inherently evil.
Yeah, that is super problematic. Always has been.
Yeah. I mean, it really kind of stems through like various different rings, and you can kind of sift through whatever you like. But the concept in most settings like Forgotten Realms is that some races are just evil. There might be exceptions, but they are exceptions to the rule. They are rarities. So by default, these races are either been corrupted in the past, or as a race, they are influenced by a god or a greater planar power.
Right.
Great examples of this are gnolls or orcs. Almost always evil for evil's sake. Yunogu, the kind of like god over orcs, he's like a demon prince, I believe. He makes gnolls just awful, fucking miserable monsters that eat and destroy. They have no positive influence on the world, whatever. Same thing for orcs, like maybe to a lesser extent, but like they're always going to be very ferocious and kind of barbaric because Groomsh wills them to be, and that's their god. So there's none of that. there's maybe a little bit in that in Baron. Like an angel is going to be an angel, like a demon's going to be a demon, but there's also gray in that. Like a demon can do good things because it wants to, gain favor, or it's trying to like bring about a prophecy. So things can be behind the scenes.
Right.
The next big point, kind of moving away from gods and like cosmology, magic is widespread. So you could say, yeah.
So Ryan, not to just add to your what's the word I'm looking for?
Spiel.
Yeah, spiel. Spiel works. But I remember earlier when you talked about, like when you were explaining it to Chowder and I, the difference between like how orcs aren't evil. You said that it was kind of recontextualized as just like tribalism and their culture, right?
Yeah. So he looked at them. So what Keith Baker did for a lot of this, and I have a point later, but we can talk about it now, is that he looked at the statistics that the creatures had, and then what would that also be good for? Right. So I think in 3.5, like they were strong, and I can't remember the exact thing, but like they were a little less intelligent.
Yeah, they're probably it's probably like +1 to strength, -1 to intelligence, or something like that.
Yeah, they're like strong, and I can't remember what 5e ones are. But so he looked at that and it's like, well, they're not just evil. Like in my world, I don't want them to be evil, but they're definitely going to be like passionate. They're more tribalistic. They're more the way that their kind of like background works. I want them, they're good in groups, but they're also like fierce protectors. They're good at being like paladins. They're good at being barbarians. They're good at being fighters. They're naturally strong, but they're not necessarily inherently evil.
Right.
So like a lot of the major orc tribes, they're either like kind of nomadic, like nomadic tribes that kind of move around, and they tend to be like druids or rangers and stuff like that. Or he has like a big sect of orcs up where like this place called the Demon Wastes, which is kind of to the northwest, and Corvair, which is the main like continent. And they're like literally the front line trying to keep demons from pouring out of the ground. Like they're paladins, like super firm in their faith, like super passionate about their religion. And they're like not quite zealots. They're good guys or good people. I don't want to necessarily say guys, but they're like fighting demons like tooth and nail. So instead of making them like mindless barbarians that are at the will of like just raping and pillaging, they're like a sophisticated people that has like a culture.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's more than just one type of them. Like there are different types. Like the sect that's up in the Demon Waste is completely separated from the one that's in like another part of Corvair, because they're not just identified by their race, they're identified by their culture, which I think is a huge step.
That's another thing I like. Like something really bad fantasy writers fall into is that everyone in a singular race acts the same way. Every elf is like a snobbish
exactly
is a snobbish nature lover. Every dwarf is obsessed with mining.
Exactly.
That's just not true in real life, and also makes for kind of boring storytelling. And
it's lame. It's a lame story.
And I like it too because it's like it takes like the core elements of the practicality of like how you interact with these races, and it largely keeps it faithful to like the original intent of it, but then it recontextualizes in a way that's more like realistic and more like well-rounded, and it allows for more variation. So I think that it's
100% agree.
It's like it keeps it in the same context, like back like the original intent, because it's like, you could largely say like, oh, if there's a society that like, if like orcs, for example, are a society that, like values certain things, then they might be more inherently like privy to being manipulated by evil forces or blah, blah, blah. So like probably a lot of the times they do end up being on the evil side, but like it's not because they're inherently evil. It has to do with like other aspects of their culture, which I think is like pretty interesting. And it just recontextualizes it in a way that like keeps it true, but also like makes it, more nuanced.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a lot of nuance in Eberron. Keith Baker's very big on culture. So even though you might be an orc, if you grew up in a major city far away from like the Demon Waste, you would have no connection to that culture. You, by definition, would be like Sharn's one of the biggest cities. Like if you grew your entire life in Sharn, you would see yourself as a person of Sharn, not like, oh, I'm an orc of the Demon Waste, blah, blah, blah. So
so it's like cultural, not genetic.
Yeah, it's cultural. It's all about culture, where you are, like how you're perceived. So moving on to the next little bit, like one of the major differences, magic is widespread. Traditionally, I would view Eberron as a high magic setting. Magic is everywhere. Society is almost built upon it in a lot of ways. Keith Baker himself says he doesn't like it to be called high magic. He likes it to be called wide magic, because magic from like cantrip level to 3rd level is very common. It's everywhere. It's infused throughout people's society, their culture, technology. Once you get past 3rd level, it starts to get rarer and rarer. Like once you get past 5, you start talking about like legendary stuff. And especially once you get like level 7, that is like maybe one person in a million knows how to do that sort of magic. And you as a hero are probably that one in a million.
That's interesting too, because you start off kind of on ground level with stuff, but you still can do things, but you can do things that a lot of people can do, and then you like
kind of slowly but surely expand past. And that's another big thing. One of the major conceits of Eberron is that like a lot of the big players in terms of power, like the world's most powerful druid is an actual tree and cannot leave from where he is sprouted.
Sorry, cannot
leave. Yes.
Leave.
And then the most powerful, the most powerful cleric is like an 8-year-old girl that loses all of her powers once she leaves this like holy city. Like some of the best fighters are either like dead or potentially evil. So you are really the only force that has a chance against some of these higher level threats. So there is no like backup team. There is no Elminster. There's no like greater like hero that's in the canon of like in Forgotten Realms. There's a billion heroes that have risen up and fallen, and they're in the lore and they're all over the place. And for whatever reason, they're gone this week, and you're the one that has to, you and your party are the people that have to take on Vecna. They don't have a lot of that in Eberron. You are the force for good or evil, depending on your campaign. So with this widespread magic, they've achieved like a pretty high technological level. It's pretty comparable, depending on how you want to play it, between like 1920s and like 1950s Europe. Like Art Deco. Like the book, the newest book is like, has a lot of Art Deco inspired art. There are, there's airships that are powered by elementals. They have just regular seafaring ships that are powered by elementals. They have the lightning train, which is powered by various elementals, and it's very connects most of the major cities on the continent of Corvair.
Yeah, we had like a encounter on that lightning train, right?
Yeah, you guys did at the very end.
Yeah,
as it was about to like zip away, you guys got on there. And part of that, one of the reasons that magic is so widespread is that there's a thing called dragon marks and the dragon marked houses. So for whatever reason, there's this thing called the Draconic Prophecy. It's kind of like this underlying maybe plot thread you can put through your story. These things called dragon marks start showing up on very specific people. So for example, the Mark of Healing and the Mark of Hospitality, they showed up on halflings. And because they have these marks, depending on how like big the mark is and how much power it has, if like say you're a Mark of Healing, like you just innately, no matter what your level is in whatever class, you can do like some healing. Or if you're in the Hospitality one, you can like make food out of thin air, or you can make a place to stay out of thin air. So like these dragon marks and these dragon mark houses have used this like fairly for the most part pretty low level magic, but because they have some numbers and the ability to replicate the magic fairly regularly, they've been able to build up these like kind of barren, like robber baron houses that are able they're kind of a weird, not quite citizens of Corvair, which is the main continent, but they're their own almost like entity, city state of their own that's really based around capitalism and like hierarchy and stuff like that. So it's kind of a weird thing. You can have these robber baron-esque, like very 1920s, like Standard Oil type of characters that are like, I control all the healing in this city, monopolies and stuff like that. Another major difference, planes. The different planes of Eberron are actually pretty active forces on the material plane. There's a thing called a manifest zone, which creates spaces where an influence from a plane can be directly felt. So Sharn is connected to, I believe, the plane of air, and because of that, air magic works better. So flying is a little bit easier, levitation's easier, and because of that, they're able to build up this city to be like over a mile high because of the inherent magic that's like suffused through this little small pocket in this region.
That's cool. And I like how you know they take all the conceits that he's adding to the world, and he really explores like all the practical implications of like what that would mean.
Yeah,
you know.
It makes me. It's a little random, but it makes me think of Young Justice, Because, like...
Really?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, because, like, Young Justice...
Yeah. No, I feel you.
Because, like, you know, I think what makes Young Justice so beloved is that it really thinks about what all these crazy superhero things, how it affects the world.
Yeah.
In a much deeper way. Like,
Right.
what would Earth's relations to aliens be beyond just... We ignore them until they invade us. No, they have
You know-
Earth has diplomatic relations. Superheroes have to like think about like larger geopolitical issues. Sidekicks are used as like a special ops unit. And it like considers like hierarchy and like how people would react and how like villains would adapt, and then how heroes would adapt to villains adapting to them, and that kind of stuff. And
it takes in the greater situation, rather than just very acute little line of like, this is the story I want to tell. It kind of surrounds it with all this. I mean, for lack of a better word, a little bit of fluff.
Yeah,
it kind of wraps everything around.
You know, I think you're onto something here, Chowder, because it's like. I think, like, and, yeah, I promise I'm tying this back to Eberron, right? But, like, one of the things about Young Justice is nice that is, like, a lot of superhero content, you know, will try to, you know, make it more, quote-unquote, realistic, right? Like a lot of the live-action stuff, right? But then it sort of feels like a sort of watered-down version of the original source material. But if something like Young Justice, it keeps all the wacky, zany stuff that's so fun about superhero stuff, and then it contextualizes the world around it to make it feel more realistic, because it's actually more realistic in the way that it operates, not in the way that it's similar to our world. And I think that's one of the nice things about Eberron too, is that like it feels like its mission statement is to make D&D more realistic, but it's not like
sacrificing all the fantastical stuff about D&D.
Exactly. It's not sacrificing all the fantasy stuff. It's taking that fantasy stuff and like really going like wild with it, and going then ham. Going ham and exploring all the implications, and keeping those implications follow like a consistent structure, so that it feels at the very least like realistic to itself, if it's not realistic to the way our world operates, you know? It's like, oh, if I want the world to be different than how our world is, I can't just like change the things in our world but follow the same rules. I have to change the rules so they operate in the way that would make the world this way. And I think that that's really like an intelligent way to go about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's more work, but the end result I feel is rewarding.
It's richer.
Yeah.
Right.
And that kind of how it works too, because Keith Baker stated many times that like things like manifest zones, which seem kind of abstract and they don't really talk a ton about it in the book, they're there for the DM to create an opportunity for the party. It's like, oh, how do I like? Why is this particular place they're about to go into? Why is this the only place that has like a bunch of zombies floating around? Why aren't there other ones? Like, oh, this one is linked to the plane of death. So there's like some inherent energy there that maybe they could even stop if they wanted to. Mm-hmm. And like, why is this city so good for like the managerial like law? Why is this the city of law? It's like, oh, because it's kind of connected to a plane that is copacetic with like law or maybe against chaos. So it kind of like, it's something you can flavor in, and it allows, like, it gives a tool for a DM to use, be like, this is why this place in particular is different, not just be like, because. And one last little bit on that part is so planar powers are actually pretty active on the material plane too. There are demons that are like an active influence on Eberron. And there's also, yeah, for sure. And also the plane of dreams, Dalcor, is actually a major like source of villain for Eberron. So the in Dalcor, they are trying to make sure that the cycle that is like the dreaming dark remains in dreaming dark. Like I guess every like 40,000 years it shifts back between like the dreaming dark and something else. Something probably light, if you're going to be simplistic about it. And they are trying to like figure out a way to keep this like clock from turning back into like eliminating what they are and building them back. So they're like sending out emissaries on the material plane to like figure out how to stop it. Or if they can like corrupt enough people and take over enough people's minds, like maybe that's all they need. They just need an anchor. So there's like some weird planar stuff that I think is very different from what you typically see in some of the other settings. It's not just demons. There's like these kind of like weird dream outsiders that can like affect your game in very weird ways. Another pretty important point. So there's a couple of different points I'm going to make with this one. In the setting itself, Keith Baker keeps he has a lot of detail, but they're big points that are just kept vague. So one of the major events, in Eberron, for the typical setting, like the default setting, is that like 4 years ago, there's like 100-year major super big war. It spanned the entire continent. It was like a civil war. Everybody wanted to. It was over who was going to ascend next to be like the overall king of Corvair, and it had been going on for 100 years, and it was only stopped because a nuclear level like magical event decimated entire country Sire, which is like at the center of Corvair. The war had no victor, only a decisive loser, and nobody knows what happened. They just know one day Sire, like mist started like pouring out of the ground and like started to alter, kill, and destroy anything connected. Like it just like started to spread out, and it kind of like stopped kind of at some like various edges of Sire and then like just stayed there. So now there's this like whole country that was actually a really rich and beautiful country that has been like 100% destroyed, and nobody knows who did it. And the only reason they stopped the war is because they don't know who did it. Like nobody wants to go to war with the country that can like make your entire civilization disappear overnight. So everybody is kind of like this Cold War where everybody's looking at each other thinking, well, do they have the ability to do that again? Or do I have the ability? Like, I know it's possible now. Can I do that to them? And
Jesus.
That's kind of the setup. And that's like a big mystery. There is no canon reason why they call it the Morning. There is no canon reason why the Morning happened. There's no canon reasons for a lot of things in Eberron.
That sounds like something like where it's like, here's the setup. I'll let you fill in with your own details. Yeah.
They want it to be so like the cause of the Morning can be anything you want. It could have just been a random happenstance. It could have been agents of Dalcor. It could have been maybe the Warforged like found a way to create this devastation because it didn't affect the Warforged.
Sounds like some fucking Ozymandias type shit to me. Honestly.
Kinda, yeah. It could have been too. Like you could have had like their dragons are a completely different kind of dragon in Eberron. They have their own like country called Arganessen. They're extremely intelligent. They're very powerful. They are the major force. But they're like a hermit kingdom. They only interact in very subtle ways. And like you could play that. Like maybe the dragons of Arganessen were behind the Morning. They are the most powerful force on this world. And like, what if they're planning for your country to be next? How do you stop? Like, what clues do you discover? Like, do you go into Sire at post-Morning and like see if you can find any clues of how they made it come about? Like, if you could stop it? It's like plot hooks on plot hooks on plot hooks, which I love. And because of that, so the standard setting, the actual like start date in the campaign guide says that it's about 4 years after the end date. 4 years past the Day of Mourning and 2 years since whatever they call the Treaty of Thronehold, which kind of like set them all up as independent countries. They all kind of signed a treaty together like, all right, we're not going to fuck with each other anymore. Because of that, it has no victor, just a really bad loser. So all these old tensions remain. It's a 100-year war. Like there was nothing decisive about there was no victory. So there's refugees, soldiers who have been spent their entire generation in war are just like out and about doing something. So there's all these kind of like, there's political intrigue. There's the realities of post World War I or even World War II life. Like what does a country that is for the last 100 years who's done nothing but war, what does it do afterwards? Like, what does it do with this large standing army that all of a sudden it doesn't need at the moment, but it could need like next week? You never know when like somebody's going to attack you again and start up the old war. So it has that kind of like in the background. And then the major themes Keith Baker had in mind were pulp, noir, and swashbuckling adventures. So think Indiana Jones, The Maltese Falcon, and Casablanca. They're really good examples of a lot of the things he's trying to encapsulate. If your basic Forgotten Realms setting is a knight fighting a dragon in a long forgotten treasure hoard, Eberron, it's a dashing rogue fighting a game of wits with a dragon who is a mastermind behind a political assassination, throwing current international relations into chaos. It's super dramatic. It's really extra, but it's also fucking great. It's so much more fun because you fought the dragon in the cave 100 times, but you haven't played chess with your Moriarty, who happens to be a gold dragon.
Right.
Playing chess with a dragon sounds like a fun time. All right.
Yeah, you're not having that Moriarty moment with the dragon who's like set up the next great war, and you're trying to stop him. That's way more intriguing. You're just like, one, you're playing like a game of wits with a dragon, and two, like it allows you so many more avenues to affect the world as a whole.
See, and I like campaigns too that require you to come up with more clever solutions rather than just min-maxing your characters and hitting things a bunch. Yeah. You know, I don't think so. One thing that it reminds me of a lot is, are you familiar, Ryan, with the Adventure Zone?
Yes, Adventure Zone, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I don't think they used like an official setting past like the first arc. But I think it was just like a regular D&D thing. I don't think it was Eberron. But like a lot of so for those of you who don't know, the Adventure Zone is a D&D real play podcast made by the McElroy brothers. And so the DM, Griffin McElroy, right, he kind of crafted his own world past like their first quote unquote arc in which they were just playing like a starters,
like at Phandalin, I believe.
Yeah, Phandalin. A lot of the things in his world I think seem to operate a lot of the same ways that they do in Eberron, where it's just like the magic, the widespread use of magic means that people have like used magic to create new technology. You know, there's trains, there's like, fucking robots and moon bases and shit like that, right? It's like, it's not just taking like, oh, here's our world plus magic, and now let's pretend that, everyone knew that it existed already, but not really think about how deep those implications go. It's like, well, what would a world be like if magic existed in it for a long time? Like, how would it evolve in a different way than ours? And it's like, I don't know. It's just like an interesting concept that it's like, it's really taking that and kind of, grounding it in something that makes it seem more genuine.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in Eberron, magic is like a science. It's replicatable. You know exactly what you're going to get when you cast this spell. Like, you know exactly how to, take this various, conglomeration of items and make it into a useful magic thing. The last little point that I had, I kind of already went over. So all the races mechanically are the same, but they're approached very differently thematically. So we talked about orcs. Another one is gnomes. Instead of being quirky, fey, kind of like forest-loving tinkerers, if you use their inherent gifts in a different light, they're actually really good for like plotting, subterfuge, and assassination. They're small, they're dexterous, they're intelligent. So instead of it being, some like forest gnome like conclave, you have the city-state, or I guess the nation of Zil at the end, which like their whole thing is like they have this huge secret police that like monitors everybody. Everybody's watching everybody. It's like their national pastime is to like plot. Their legal system is very much like to the victor goes the spoils. If you can like trick somebody out of their money without technically breaking a law, you would get congratulated by the guards. You would not get taken to jail. Like, you pulled off a big plot and then there's like, you are legally cool. That means you're a good gnome. Halflings, Chowder played a halfling in the little one shot that we did. Instead of Frodo fucking Baggins, you're Genghis Khan riding a fucking velociraptor. It's great. There's nothing not to like about some of the changes that they made. And I think one of the big things is when you're talking about like Dragonlance versus Greyhawk versus like Mystera versus like Forgotten Realms, they're all more or less generic fantasy. I mean, they're different and they have a lot of lore and a lot to bite into. Overall, they are the same kind of fantasy that we've been playing for the last like 40 years, ever since D&D started.
Right.
Eberron is something truly different that looks at things a very different way, and I think it's very refreshing. And I like was blasé about Eberron like even a year ago. I like bought some books for it and I read through it and I was like, I don't know about that. And then I started to like watch some videos. I started listening to some of Keith Baker's talks, and all of a sudden it just started to click. Like, this is dope. You can really, it's all about creating a story that makes sense in a world. You've got all these various cultures. You can dig into it so many different ways. It's so rich and it allows you to build so much on top of it. by far it's becoming one of my favorite settings, and I can't wait till I can run a game in it.
Yeah, like, I'm having a similar reaction to this D&D supplement I kickstarted a while ago that ended, like, finally, like, had it released its digital copy. It's called Witch Plus Craft. I actually talked about it in a Common Briefing Program episode. What's cool about it is it takes inspiration from Studio Ghibli films.
Oh, that's cool.
Nice.
And the idea behind it is that magic is a more commonplace thing. Like, anybody can do it. And in fact, it's used for more practical things beyond just combat or adventuring. It's for artistry, pottery, being a seamstress or seamster, that kind of stuff. Like, artisan jobs and stuff like that. You know, there are cantrips that are more useful for, like, a certain kind of job. There's an entire, like, crafting system for...
cool.
Yeah, and it's really cool, and I would like to try something out in that, but, like, the basic gist is it's intrigues me because it's imagining a world where magic is adopted by the common man. Like, it's not just a few people. It's not just like 1 in 20 or just like this rare dude you come across maybe in a big city. But like just go over to your neighbor and he'll like use magic to do whatever. And
that's smacks of Eberron too. Like there's magical artisans. There's something called mage rights, who just know like 1 or 2 couple spells. They know like and then a couple of like rituals, and like you'll have a mage craft or a mage mage crafter who's just about like making locks, and he has the spells where you can just make locks really easily, or like an artisan who can shape stone and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's something I liked about Eberron too. Just like it's a part of the world, like because like in a lot of fantasy settings they'll have magic, but it's like implemented like oil into water. You know, it's not really mixing into the common person's life. It's just like a invasion of sorts into their lives.
Yeah,
like,
it feels alien, even though like magic is a thing. Because like I never understood
like
that.
no one acts surprised that it exists, but also there's just like a bunch of common systems that can be easily like overwritten by the existence of magic. Like they just don't have any plan for it.
Nobody considered the implications of how magic will apply into this,
Yeah. Which, I mean, it kind of drives me crazy, because if you were a wizard, even a low-level wizard, and you can or a cleric, and you could cast healing, or even, like, cure poison, you are instantly the most useful person in the village.
Yeah.
And, like, you would either want to make money off of those skills, or 2, you
pass
would want
those skills along,
pass
so that
those skills
more
off.
People can,
And if you could make money using those skills, why aren't there more people like, oh, I'll try and learn how to do this? Why is it just that, like, there's the one wizard off on in the middle of the woods by himself, like, doing fuck all?
Yeah.
When he could be, honestly, making either a ton of money or helping a lot of people. I mean, making a lot of money, you could say that's being kind of evil. Helping a lot of people, you could say it's being good. So there's all this in between that you're missing out on just by having him off in the woods doing nothing.
Right. It reminds me a lot of like the Avatar universe, and specifically like Legend of Korra, like how because like, and I like it too because it does kind of show both sides of it, right? Where it shows like, you know, a world that's in war when it's like, oh, a lot of them use their bending for like fighting and shit, right? Because they've been in a war for 100 years. But then at the end of the series, when the war is over, and then like, you know, fast forward like fucking 50 years or some shit.
50 years, something,
Well, I guess more like 60, but in
60,
Legend
70, I guess he had to die.
Yeah. Anyway, doesn't matter. And in Legend of Korra, right? Like after the war, they've like hit an industrial revolution, and we see now like all these different ways of bending are now being incorporated into like their society, cool. And it's like, and it's also interesting too because it's like,
even in the original Last Airbender series, you see bending being applied to regular
like
stuff,
industry.
like games or
like in Bossing Say, the earthbending is
the
used
mail
for,
system,
for a mail system. Waterbending is used to like actually for architecture in the North Pole because it's ice.
Yeah.
And it's like a common theme throughout both Last Airbender and Legend of Korra is bending is an extension of the person, not just a tool they use. And Avatar always tries to realize that, like, these people aren't just fighting with it; it's a part of like how they live their day-to-day lives. And then,
and it's also interesting too because, like, you know, if you look at our own world, just like societally, you know, with the change in custom and the advance of technology, like just the human race in general becomes better at certain things and worse at other things. And something that's interesting about like Legend of Korra, right, is that like in Last Airbender, things that are like rare skills like lightning bending and metal bending and shit like metal bending wasn't even a thing, right, until Toph came up with it. In Legend of Korra, those are more commonplace because, and this is what we mentioned earlier, right, the people who knew how to do those things after the war was over took the time to teach them to other people because they had useful ways. Now, like lightning benders, lightning benders are like working in factories, right, to like make in power plants, and metal benders are like the police force who wear like armor and like use it. Like it follows the practical implications of it, and it also like thinks about how the world would realistically evolve over time, which is something that Eberron does too, right? Because it's like, and Eberron kind of does it in a more like reverse engineering sort of way, where it says like, okay, well, this has all been around for a long time, and we know that people have been powerful a long time ago, so how would that evolve up until now, right? And like, what are the advancements in technology that they would have, right? And it's kind of, I don't know, it's a really interesting way to take like hard magic systems and sort of like, you know, because I feel like in a lot of things it's like, oh, either magic or science, where it's like, you know, magic is just like fun and flamboyant and does all these like crazy but sort of impractical things, and science is like, oh, you know, here's the science of it, here's how it all functions, here's how it works. But it takes magic and treats it like a science, where it's just like, yeah, it can be fun and flamboyant, but it still would have real practical implications and uses in the actual world, which is like, I don't know. It's super interesting, right?
Exactly. Like the same like types of magic that keep, you know, an airship afloat. Like they have like spells and bindings for like, they bind water elementals, I think, to their sewers. So like it's constantly like pumping out water, and it's able to pump up water. Cool. Some of these like mile high, because I mean some of these towers are like a mile high. So how do you pump up? It's because you instead of just having pipes, you infuse these pipes with magic, and then every once in a while you have like a little culvert that holds a water elemental that's actively like, that's binded to it, that's actively like pushing the water through and controlling the water. It does think about some of the simple things, like how would you get, like, because Sharn, which is like a major setting, that's probably where if I was going to make an adventure I would set it in, is like New York City in the probably between the 20s and the 50s. Like, how do you get all that stuff from magic? Like, and I really like that they've gone through and thought it all out. And it's like, in reading some of the stories, because like any Wizards of the Coast property, they've also done like novels and stuff like that just for reading. And like they kind of work it all out through there. Like the city functions like this. There's big elevators that take you up and down. If you're really poor, you can take the stairs. There's like these air gondolas that can take you from one level to the other. They have poor parts of town. They have rich parts of town. They have exotic parts of town where like people come in from other places. And I think just the way that they've built everything and it fits together feels right, when in some fantasy settings, like, oh, this town's all about like tinkering. It's full of tinker gnomes, and they make a bunch of like ships and all this other stuff. It feels that way, feels shoehorned in.
Yeah, they all approach towns or settings like the original most of Star Trek treats like entire planets. This planet has one singular quirk, and like that's gimmick. It.
Yeah, it's like a gimmick. Yeah. And doesn't think about like how that would actually fucking work. Yeah.
And you know, there is a reason for that. Like it'd be like if you're only spending one episode on the planet, there's not really a point in having an entire built out in-depth lore to it. So
right, you know. And like there's value to that too, because it's like in the case of Star Trek, right, like the gimmick of each like planet, right, is to bring up a certain like philosophical implication that puts you outside of your normal realm, right? So it's like then they can focus in on like a piece of philosophy, But it's like, yeah, okay, practically, right, like, that society wouldn't make any fucking sense, right? But it does serve a purpose for the episode, you know?
That makes me think of the first season of Next Generation where they just find space Irish people. Oh, man. Have you guys seen that one? I can't remember the name. But
I've watched
it's so little. Dumb.
Very like little Star Trek.
And it's like, you know, those first 2 seasons of Next Generation were
just
really
rough.
bad.
It was Up a Long Ladder. So is an 18th episode. Oh, it's a second season.
Yeah, like, it's incredible what a jump in quality season 2 and season 3 is, you know? Like,
yeah, it's
like night
so
and day.
Weird. But yeah, it's this crazy thing where it's just a bunch of space Irish, and I guess it does pose the question, like, for whatever reason they could fuck real good, and like their sister colony. No, it really comes down like these Irish people could fuck real good, but their sister colony that I guess they split off from couldn't fuck at all. So the way that they're all like based off cloning. So how they get this, like, solve this issue is they get the people that can fuck real good to the people that don't know how to fuck at all, and then they just tell them to fuck. Sometimes,
my goodness,
it's hilarious.
I feel like sex ed would have sufficed, but okay.
Well, I guess there just wasn't enough of them, and they were so close to each other, like genetically, that they had to resort to cloning. They couldn't have sex with each other, otherwise they'd be like inbred or something. But yeah, it's so stupid. That one is a bad one, but it does give a good philosophical argument for like what to do if one fucks too much or fucks too little.
The classic old, you know, dilemma, philosophical dilemma.
The classic philosophical dilemma of what to do with fucks.
All right, I think that's probably a good place to, I mean, even though that's ending on talking about Star Trek rather than Eberron, I think we get the idea, right?
Man, this episode had fucking everything. You listeners are fucking lucky. We talked about Dungeons and Dragons. We talked about The Last Airbender. We talked about Star Trek: The Next Generation, and we talked about Irish people, and we talked about fucking
and Young Justice. Don't forget Young Justice.
Oh, Young Justice.
A little bit of the DC universe.
That's a lot of bang for the buck.
Yeah.
I mean, for the free buck.
Alrighty, guys. Thank you so much for a very practical and, you know, well thought out discussion.
Thank you. I enjoyed yelling about Eberron.
Now we're going to be moving on to the rating section, where each of us are going to rate the topic on a scale from 1 to 10. And what are we going to do? Scale from 1 to 10? I don't know. Ryan, do you have any good ideas? You know more about Eberron than I do.
1 to 10 dragon shards.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Why not? It's a little boring, yeah, I mean, but okay.
Well, I don't know what a Warforged, Kalishtar, a Quori, 1 to 10 Quori.
Let's just do fucking dragon shards, or 1 to 10 cities blown up to create a Cold War, or...
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna go with that. 1 to 10 cities blown up to create a Cold War.
Okay. Yeah, I'm more interested because... Ryan, you obviously are into this, and you brought this topic. I do want to hear from you, but I would like to hear from Chowder first, actually, on this one. Chowder, how would you rate the setting of Eberron on a scale from 1 to 10 cities blown up to create a Cold War?
Technically, it's countries blown up.
Countries blown up. Sorry, yes.
Alright, I would give it 7 out of 10. It's really good, and maybe if I experienced more of it, my opinion would go up. But, from where I stand, it feels like a lot of, like, speculative fiction, sci-fi, fantasy, what have you, is moving in the same direction Eberron is.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily unique in that regard. But that being said, it's still really good. I like a lot of the concepts it's playing with. I like that it treats race with more nuance. I like that it doesn't have a binary good, evil, lawful, criminal system going on. I like the twist they put on, like, classes and races. I just like the setting, so, you know, I think 7 is a good, solid number, and I will leave room for it to go up if I ever experience more of it. There we go.
Fair enough. All right, Ryan?
Oh man, you know I'm like 10 out of 10. I love it. And I wasn't a fan immediately. I thought it was a little wishy-washy. I thought it was like steampunk, which I'm not a big fan of like steampunk. It's more Magitech. And it's just like refreshing. The more you read about it, the more you learn about it, the more thought you know that the writers put into it. And it's just like, honestly, I think one of the biggest things for me was having like, I was listening to something that Keith Baker, because he has a podcast too, and he was talking about like, you're not, like one of his breakdowns of like, you're not evil because of where you were born or like who you were born to. You're evil because things either happen to you or you decide to be evil.
Right.
Like it's so much more of a rich story, as he's explaining. It's like, it's so much more of a rich story to like create a character that became evil because of X than, oh, he's orc, so he's evil.
To quote Mewtwo, it's not the circumstances of one's birth that determines who they are. It's what they choose to do with the gift of life.
Hell yeah, exactly. Throw a little bit of Pokemon in there at the end. We're just covering all of our big bases.
Yeah, I love that shit. I think it's great. I think it's pretty enlightened. And I did like the fact that it was more culturally based. I just think some of the setting stuff, like sometimes I know as a DM, I just want magic to be fucking everywhere. Sometimes it's so boring to have like a little town, like Podunk Town, that's got like maybe one wizard and there's nothing fucking going on. Yeah. This gives you so much to throw at your players.
Yeah.
There's airships, there's huge cities, there's magic that's like big and small that you can throw at them. So it doesn't have, if you want to give them something, it doesn't have to be some crazy fucking magical item that does +3 damage. You're like, oh, this comb, like you put it through your hair and it makes your hair smell good. Like, that's the type of things that Eberron is built on, just little quirky items.
Yeah, no, you might really like witchcraft then, because it's full of stuff like that too. Like,
but yeah, so wait, Jeff, what did you think?
Yeah, I think
what's your dealie?
Yeah, I'm landing about the same place as Chowder, probably a 7 or maybe an 8 out of 10. I think, yeah, like I really like. You know, I've said this multiple times in the episode. I like really practical sort of systems like Young Justice or like Avatar or like Eberron that take a fantasy sort of setting and take these like fantastical elements and make them more realistic in the way that they operate rather than, you know, dulling them down to make them more realistic.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate those qualities of Eberron. One thing in that regard that sort of confuses me, which is why maybe I wouldn't rate it a little bit higher, is like I feel like it doesn't quite have a good enough answer for like why the player characters then suddenly become so powerful. Like I like the philosophy of like, oh, you know, you're the ones who are really going to be solving the problems, right? But it would feel a little bit weird for the entire world to be built up like this practical system and then have your characters very quickly advance from being like, you know, ho-hum nobodies who know any sort of kind of magic that your mother and your sister know to like, oh, now suddenly like 3 adventures later we're starting to get really powerful. It seems like there would need to be some sort of story justification to make that link.
There is some story justifications for that. So I don't want to go too far into it.
We don't need to get into it, but like it's nice to know that that's the thing. But like, you know, I was just that was like the one quality of it that kind of made me raise an eyebrow, because I was just like, well, that doesn't sort of seem to fit within the whole design philosophy of it. So it's good to know that there's some more answers.
There's definitely ways you could weave that in for sure.
Yeah.
Like why you guys in particular are the ones that seem to be getting so much more powerful.
Yeah. And I agree with Chowder. Like I know that Eberron, you know, is a little bit older than like us talking about it now, and we're talking about because it's kind of having a resurgence, right? But like, yeah, like even if it might have been one of the earlier things to do this, by now it's like not as unique to have a world that's sort of set up that way. I think there's like a lot of appreciation for like the internal logic of fantasy setting, which is why things like the Adventure Zone exist, where it's like where it basically follows the same kind of, you know, the same kind of framework where it's just like, yep, lots of fun fantasy, and now this is the implications and how it actually operates within the world. So yeah,
faux show.
All right. I think that is just about going to wrap it up for us today, folks. Thank you for listening to the Common Geeking Program. Again, I've been your host. My name is Jeff Leavitt, and you can find me... Oh boy, yeah, I've got an Instagram. It's things I wish existed, and there's a dot between each word. I post like a lot of art stuff there. I'm getting my MFA right now, so I've been making a lot of good art shit, and that's kind of where I post it. I've got a YouTube. There's not much on there. I've been joined by Ryan and Chowder. Would you guys like to give out your own handles or places where you can be found?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. And I can't remember when I'm on Instagram, but on Twitter I am Ryan_MOSSB. You can also hear me on another podcast that the Common Geeking Program kind of puts on, which is Dice Populi. And I'm usually on their Twitter feed and their,
speaking of D&D, right?
Instagram feeds. Yeah, faux show. So yeah, if you want to like reach out to me there, those would be also work.
Chowder?
Yeah, I'm Taeemul Chowdhury or Chowder, whichever you prefer. And you can find me on Twitter at Taeemul Chowdhury. That's about all I got to say. Ciao.
Fair enough.
Hell yeah. Keith Baker lives forever.
All right. And our next episode will air on the third Friday in February, which is... that's sad. It's not the 14th. It's the 21st. The 14th is the second Friday in February, which makes sense because weeks are 7 days long. So our next episode will air on the 21st of February. And anyway, thank you all for listening and sharing and subscribing and everything else. And we'll talk to you next month.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
The Common Geeking Program is hosted by Jeff Leavitt, joined this episode by Taeemul Chowdhury and Ryan Mossbarger. The episode is sponsored by January 3rd, the day that threw my groove off. The podcast is created and produced by Colin Ketchen and Jeff Leavitt, and features original music by Colin Ketchen. This episode was edited by me, Taeemul Chowdhury. We'd love for you to stay engaged with us on social media at Geeking Program, or by using hashtag CGP. If you want to know more about us and all of our other projects, head to commongeekingprogram.com. Stay in touch, stay tuned, and as always, thank you for listening to this podcast. Ciao!
Peter picked a peck of pickled peppers.